Before I show you this footage, I need you to understand something. I've spent 15 years debunking paranormal videos. 15 years proving that every shadow, every blur, every unexplained movement has a rational explanation. I've built my reputation on it. And now I'm about to destroy that reputation entirely. What I'm about to show you has been authenticated by 3 separate video analysis experts. People who specialize in detecting manipulation, distortion, and digital artifacts. People whose careers depend on their ability to spot even the slightest hint of tampering. All 3 came to the same conclusion. This footage is real, untouched, unaltered. And that's the problem. Because what you're about to see isn't just another grainy video of something moving in the woods. It's not a shadow that could be anything, or a blur that might be nothing. This is crystal clear footage of something that, by every law of nature and physics we know, should not, cannot exist. I know how this sounds. I've heard all the stories before, all the claims, all the supposed evidence of cryptids and monsters and things that go bump in the night. I've spent my career disproving them, one by one, taking away the mystery, replacing fear with facts. But this is different. 2 months ago, this footage arrived in my inbox. No sender name, no explanation, just a video file and a set of coordinates in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. I almost deleted it, almost dismissed it as just another hoax, another waste of time. Thank God I didn't. Because what I found when I started investigating, the evidence I uncovered, the connections I made, the horrible truth I discovered, it changed everything I thought I knew about reality itself. I'm not asking you to believe me. Not yet. I'm just asking you to watch, to see what I saw, to understand why a lifelong skeptic is now sitting here, risking everything to share this with you. But first, a warning. Once you see this footage, you can't unsee it. Once you understand what it means, you can't go back to not knowing. And most importantly, once it knows you've seen it, it might just start looking for you too. Are you ready? Are you sure? Then let me show you why the devil still hunts in Jersey. Let me tell you about Mark Sullivan. 20 years as a wildlife photographer, published in National Geographic, and one of the most respected names in his field. The kind of guy who'd spend 6 months tracking a single snow leopard just to get the perfect shot. A man of science and patience. Definitely not someone who'd jump at shadows or let his imagination run wild. That's important to understand. Because what happened to Mark in the Pine Barrens wasn't the result of an overactive imagination. It wasn't the mistake of some amateur who couldn't tell a bear track from a boot print. This was a professional who knew exactly what he was looking at, and still couldn't explain it. It started as a simple assignment. The Pine Barrens' endangered species needed documenting. The bog turtle, the timber rattler, the northern pine snake. Mark had done dozens of projects like this before. Set up his cameras, establish his blinds, and wait for nature to reveal itself. Routine work for someone with his experience. The first week was exactly what you'd expect. Standard wildlife patterns, normal animal behavior. Nothing that would raise an eyebrow from someone who'd spent 2 decades in the field. But then, something changed. It began with the birds. You see, Mark had mapped out their usual patterns. When they'd feed, when they'd nest, when they'd sing. But on day 8, they just stopped. Complete silence. The kind of silence that makes experienced outdoorsmen pack up and leave. But Mark stayed. Maybe that was his first mistake. Then came the tracks. Not your typical deer prints or coyote marks. These were wrong. The stride length suggested something bipedal, but the depth of the impressions indicated a weight distribution that defied any known species. 5-toed prints, each toe ending in what could only be described as hooked claws, sunk 4 inches into solid ground. Mark did what any scientist would do. He documented everything. Took castings, measurements, photographs, tried to match them against every known species in North America. Nothing fit, not even close. But it was the markings that truly defied explanation. Claw marks, yes, but not on trees at bear height. These were 20 feet up, deep gouges in ancient pine bark. Made by something that could either leap impossibly high or wasn't bound by gravity at all. The most disturbing part, these markings formed patterns. Not random scratches, but deliberate, almost geometric designs. The kind of patterns that suggest intelligence. The kind that make you question everything you think you know about what lurks in those woods. Mark's journal entries from this period show a man struggling to reconcile his scientific training with what he was witnessing. Each day brought new evidence that contradicted everything he understood about wildlife behavior. Every night brought sounds that couldn't exist in nature. He started setting up more cameras, infrared sensors, motion detectors, everything a modern wildlife photographer has at his disposal. Not just to document anymore, but to prove to himself that he wasn't losing his mind, that what he was seeing was real. But here's the thing about the Pine Barrens. Sometimes proving something is real is far worse than dismissing it as imagination. Sometimes the truth is more terrifying than uncertainty. And what those cameras eventually captured, well, that's where our story truly begins to descend into nightmare. Let's talk about the audio recordings first. As a wildlife photographer, Mark Sullivan knew every sound these woods could make. Every bird call, every rustling branch, every creature that called the Pine Barrens home. But what his equipment captured on the night of September 15th defied categorization. The first recording starts normally enough, typical nighttime forest ambience. But at exactly 3:17 a.m., everything changes. The sound begins as something like a whale song, but distorted, coming from somewhere it absolutely shouldn't, the depths of the New Jersey woods. It shifts into frequencies that oscillate between infrasonic and ultrasonic ranges, something no known terrestrial animal can produce. Our audio experts have confirmed this is no overlay, no technical glitch, no equipment malfunction. Then came the electromagnetic anomalies. Every piece of Mark's high-end equipment began experiencing inexplicable failures. Batteries that should have lasted weeks drained in hours. Compasses spinning wildly, not just pointing the wrong way, but actively rotating as if tracking something moving around the camp. Brand new cameras showing interference patterns that our tech experts say would require levels of electromagnetic energy that should have been lethal to any living thing in the area. The locals, those who've lived in the Pine Barrens for generations, they started talking. Not at first, mind you. These aren't people who readily share their stories with outsiders. But something was different this time. Something had them scared enough to break their silence. Sarah Kaufman, third-generation cranberry farmer, reported all her dogs refusing to go outside for 3 nights straight, something that had never happened before. Thomas Reed, local ranger for 23 years, found a half-ton boulder moved 50 feet uphill overnight. No tracks, no equipment marks, no explanation. And old Mrs. Davidson, who's lived alone on the edge of the Barrens since 1962, started keeping every light in her house on after dark. She won't tell us what she saw through her kitchen window that night, but she hasn't turned those lights off since. But it's the peripheral camera footage that truly makes my skin crawl. Frame 4891 of Camera B, positioned on the northwestern edge of Mark's study area. Nothing special about this camera, just standard motion-activated wildlife monitoring equipment. The kind that's captured thousands of deer, foxes and bears over the years. What it captured at 3:17 a.m., yes, the exact same time as that first audio recording, exists in just 3 frames. In the first frame, nothing unusual. In the second frame, something moves past the camera. Something tall. Something that seems to bend in ways vertebrate anatomy shouldn't allow. The third frame shows only darkness, as if something had completely blocked out all ambient light from the forest. When we enhanced these frames, applied every known forensic technique to clarify the image, what we found, well, let me put it this way. I've had 3 separate wildlife biologists examine this footage. All 3 asked to have their names removed from the analysis. All 3 suggested we stop looking. All 3 refused to enter the Pine Barrens, even in broad daylight. The most disturbing part? This was just the beginning. Just the first hint of what was coming. Because whatever triggered that camera, whatever made those sounds, whatever was causing these impossible electromagnetic disturbances, it was getting closer. And it seemed to be growing more interested in the man who was trying to document its existence. You can see the change in Mark's behavior through his video logs. The calm, methodical scientist gives way to something else, someone driven by an obsession that consumed him more with each passing day. His camera placements became more aggressive, his search patterns more erratic. He stopped documenting other wildlife entirely. Every waking moment focused on tracking what he began calling the entity. The physical evidence he collected defies rational explanation. Claw marks in solid granite, cut so deep you could fit your entire hand inside them. Hair samples that, when analyzed, showed characteristics of both mammalian and reptilian DNA, along with genetic markers our labs couldn't even categorize. A partial footprint in crystallized sap that somehow contained active biological material. Material that, according to 3 separate labs, was still alive despite being trapped in hardened resin. But it was the patterns that truly revealed the horror of what Mark had discovered. The entity wasn't just moving through the woods, it was studying them, playing with them. The cameras would catch impossible glimpses, always just clear enough to prove something was there, but distorted in ways that suggested it knew exactly where the blind spots were. Equipment would fail in sequences that created perfect gaps in their coverage. It was testing their limitations, learning their weaknesses. The first set of claw marks appeared in a perfect Fibonacci spiral. The second set, found 3 miles away, mirrored the pattern exactly, down to the millimeter. The third set completed a geometric shape that aligned perfectly with magnetic north. This wasn't random animal behavior. This was mathematics, intelligence, purpose. When Mark finally reached out to local historians, what he discovered chilled him to his core. The Lenape people, who lived in these woods for thousands of years before European settlement, had extensive warnings about this area, warnings that had been deliberately mistranslated or ignored. Their word for this region doesn't just mean pine barrens. It translates more accurately to the place where it waits. Their ancient pictographs show something they called the hunger that walks. Not a demon, not a spirit, but something far older. Something that was here before them. Something that would be here after them. The pictographs show it hunting not for food, but for something else. Something the Lenape elders refused to name, saying that speaking of its true purpose would draw its attention. Most disturbing of all were the patterns Mark found in their warning symbols, the exact same geometric shapes he'd documented in those claw marks. The same mathematical principles, the same precise measurements, reproduced across centuries of their art. They weren't just warning about its existence, they were documenting its behavior, its intelligence, its purpose. In Mark's final video log, the night before everything went wrong, you can see him connecting these pieces. The ancient warnings, the mathematical patterns, the biological impossibilities, all pointing to something that shouldn't exist. Something that was not just surviving in these woods, but studying them, testing them, waiting for something. And now, looking at Mark's final footage, I understand why the Lenape warnings were so specific, why they insisted that simply knowing about this entity was dangerous. Because in those last frames, in that final moment before everything changed, you can see the exact moment Mark realized. He hadn't been tracking it. It had been tracking him. What you're about to see comes from 4 separate cameras, all recording simultaneously on the night of October 13th. I've spent hundreds of hours analyzing this footage frame by frame, and I still find new details that shouldn't be possible. That can't be possible. Camera 1, Mark's main camera, shows him doing his final equipment check at 11:42 p.m. Everything normal, everything working perfectly. The infrared sensors are picking up typical nighttime wildlife activity, deer moving in the distance, an owl passing overhead. Nothing unusual. Until 2:13 a.m. That's when every animal in a 2-mile radius goes silent. Not gradually, not one by one. All at once, as if someone hit a mute button on the entire forest. The temperature drops 20 degrees in under a minute. We can see Mark's breath suddenly appear in front of him. Camera 2 catches it first. Something moving between the trees, but wrong. The movements are fluid, yet they violate every principle of biomechanics we understand. It's bipedal, roughly 9 feet tall, but its joints, they bend in impossible directions. Its limbs seem to elongate and contract with each step, as if its very structure defies laws of conservation of mass. Camera 3 captures what happened next. The entity steps into full view and, God help me, I've watched this footage 1,000 times and my mind still refuses to process what I'm seeing. Its skin seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. Not black, not dark, but an absence of light itself. The only clear features are its eyes, triangular pupils that emit their own pale blue luminescence. But it's camera 4 that reveals the true horror. As it moves, reality seems to distort around it. Trees bend away as it passes, not from physical force, but as if space itself is warping. When it breathes, you can see the air crystallize and shatter, falling like glass rain that dissolves before hitting the ground. Mark does exactly what his training taught him. Stays still, keeps filming, maintains his composure. But then it does something that changes everything. It raises what might be its head, and it smiles. Not a predatory baring of teeth, not an animal's snarl. A smile of recognition, of intelligence, of purpose. The next 42 seconds of footage show movement so fast our highest speed cameras can barely track it. The entity doesn't just move through space, it seems to fold it, appearing in multiple locations simultaneously. In one frame, it's 30 feet away. In the next, its face is inches from the camera, those triangular pupils filling the entire frame. Then we get to the moment that haunts me most. The entity reaches toward camera 1, not to attack, but with an almost gentle curiosity. As its limb extends, it seems to split into multiple versions of itself, each moving through a different plane of reality. And in the final frame, just before everything goes dark, you can see its skin open. Not like an animal's mouth, but like a door into somewhere else. Somewhere that our minds simply cannot process. The footage ends at exactly 3:17 a.m. All 4 cameras simultaneously. But here's what makes this truly terrifying. They didn't stop recording. They didn't lose power. They continued filming for hours afterward. The timestamps keep running, the sensors show they're operating normally, but from that moment on they record nothing but absolute darkness. Not night, not shadow, but a complete absence of all light, all sound, all reality. When the search party found the cameras 3 days later, they were still running, still recording that impossible darkness. And Mark was gone. No trace, no trail, no sign of struggle. Just his final notebook entry written in handwriting that gets increasingly erratic. It doesn't hunt for food, it hunts for witnesses. The search for Mark Sullivan began on October 17th, 4 days after his last transmission. What they found, or rather what they didn't find, defies explanation. His campsite was untouched, his tent still perfectly erected, his sleeping bag still neatly rolled. Even his coffee cup still sat by his equipment half full, as if he'd just stepped away for a moment. But Mark himself had vanished without a trace. No footprints leading away from camp. No signs of animal activity. No evidence of struggle. The most experienced search and rescue teams in New Jersey found nothing. Not a thread from his clothing, not a single hair, not even a scent for the dogs to follow. It was as if he'd simply ceased to exist. The recovery of his equipment revealed something even more disturbing. Every single memory card, every hard drive, every piece of digital storage contained the same impossible data. The timestamps show continuous recording, but after 3:17 a.m. on October 13th, there's nothing but that absolute darkness. Except, that's not entirely true. When our audio engineers isolated and enhanced the sound channels, they found something buried in that darkness. Something that makes even hardened professionals remove their headphones and step away from their equipment. Beneath layers of static and white noise, there's a sound that our most sophisticated audio analysis software categorizes as undefined. Not unknown, not unidentifiable, undefined. As if it exists in a frequency that our mathematics can't quantify. But here's where it gets truly chilling. In the weeks following Mark's disappearance, others came forward. A group of hikers who were camping 10 miles away that same night. They described the same sudden silence, the same temperature drop, the same distortion of reality. Their phones and cameras, all showing the same timestamp, 3:17 a.m., all containing the same impossible darkness. Local resident Maria Hernandez reported seeing something moving through her backyard at, you guessed it, 3:17 a.m. that night. She described it as a piece of the night that moved wrong. Her security cameras caught nothing but that same absolute darkness. The footage exists, but somehow contains no data our computers can process. Then there's the testimony of Dr. James Chen, a physicist from Princeton who was conducting atmospheric studies in the area. His instruments recorded gravimetric anomalies that, according to his calculations, would require a localized disruption of space-time itself. The epicenter of these anomalies? The exact spot where Mark's cameras captured their final footage. The most compelling corroboration comes from a military satellite that happened to be passing overhead that night. The classified images, which I've managed to obtain, show a circular area of complete sensor blackout, roughly 2 miles in diameter, centered on Mark's last known location. The duration of the blackout? Exactly 42 seconds, beginning at 3:17 a.m. But perhaps the most disturbing piece of evidence came 3 weeks after Mark's disappearance. A trail camera set up by the search team 5 miles from Mark's campsite captured a single frame at, yes, 3:17 a.m. In it, you can see what appears to be Mark's camera, not damaged, not abandoned, but being held up to an unseen eye. An eye that, according to the metadata embedded in the image, was looking directly at the trail camera when it took the photo. The camera was never found. But every night since then, at exactly 3:17 a.m., every digital device within 5 miles of that spot records exactly 42 seconds of that same impossible darkness. As if something is still there, still watching, still recording, still waiting for its next witness. I've spent the last 6 months working with the world's leading experts to analyze every frame of Mark's footage. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, whose software helped NASA confirm the first exoplanet photographs, spent 3 weeks running every known authentication test. Her conclusion? This footage contains visual data that our current understanding of optics cannot explain. The Berkeley Anomalistic Physics Department dedicated 2 months to studying the electromagnetic readings from Mark's equipment. They found what they called quantum irregularities in the data, patterns that suggest multiple simultaneous states of reality occurring in the same space. Their peer review was suddenly and inexplicably cancelled. But it's what happened to Dr. Marcus Whitman that truly suggests we're dealing with something beyond our comprehension. As the world's leading expert in digital forensics, he debunked hundreds of supposed paranormal videos. After spending just 48 hours analyzing Mark's footage, he burned all his research and disappeared into the Canadian wilderness. His final email to me contained just 4 words: "Stop looking, they're watching." The disappearances didn't stop with Mark. In the months following his vanishing, 7 more people have gone missing in the Pine Barrens. Each case follows the same pattern. No traces, no signals, no bodies. Just empty campsites and devices recording that same impossible darkness. Always at 3:17 a.m. Always for exactly 42 seconds. Then the government involvement began. First subtly, routine permits for the area suddenly revoked, trail cameras removed for wildlife protection, cellular towers mysteriously malfunctioning. Then came the unmarked black vehicles. The men in suits asking questions about Mark's footage. The break-ins at 3 different research labs where we'd sent samples for analysis. I've obtained internal emails from a certain 3-letter agency discussing what they call Project Witness. The details are heavily redacted, but one phrase appears repeatedly: temporal containment of observational anomalies. They know something. They've known something for a long time. A former Pentagon official, speaking under condition of anonymity, confirmed that there's been a classified protocol in place since 1947, specifically for the Pine Barrens region. Not for wildlife management, not for environmental protection, but for what they term reality integrity maintenance. Every time someone gets too close to the truth, every time someone captures something they shouldn't, these protocols activate. But they can't contain this anymore. The frequency of incidents is increasing. In the past month alone, 23 different people have reported their devices recording pure darkness at 3:17 a.m. Not just in the Pine Barrens now. Reports are coming in from as far as Philadelphia. As if whatever it is spreading. The most disturbing development came last week. A declassified document from 1958 that was never meant to see the light of day. It details the recovery of a camera from the Pine Barrens, a camera that, according to the report, hadn't been invented yet. The film inside showed something that caused the entire research team to resign. The report ends with a warning. It doesn't just hunt, it collects, and it learns. The government's attempts to suppress this information only prove how real it is. They've tried to discredit witnesses, confiscate evidence, even alter digital records. But they can't erase everything. They can't hide the pattern that's emerging. They can't stop what's coming. Because here's what they don't want you to know. Every person who's analyzed this footage, every scientist who's studied the data, every investigator who's looked too deeply, they all report the same thing. At 3:17 a.m., their devices start recording darkness. Pure, absolute, impossible darkness for exactly 42 seconds. And now, so does mine. The deeper I dig into historical records, the more I realize we're not dealing with something new. We're dealing with something that's been here all along, watching us, studying us, waiting. The infamous Leeds Devil sightings of 1909? They weren't just mass hysteria. Every single detailed account describes the same impossible movements, the same reality-bending properties we see in Mark's footage. But it goes back much further. Colonial records from 1778 describe a darkness that walks in the Pine Barrens. Dutch settlers in 1647 wrote about a creature that bends the trees without touching them. Native American cave paintings dating back thousands of years show the same triangular eyes, the same impossible geometries we see in our modern footage. The pattern is there if you know where to look. Every major cryptid sighting throughout history, the Jersey Devil, the Dover Demon, the Flatwoods Monster, they're not separate entities. They're all glimpses of the same thing, captured at different stages of its evolution. It doesn't just change its shape, it adapts to whatever we expect to see. It learns from our fears, our theories, our attempts to understand it. I've mapped every confirmed sighting across 4 centuries. Each incident adds new characteristics, new abilities, new ways of interacting with our reality. In the 1700s, it could only be seen by one person at a time. By the 1800s, it could affect multiple witnesses simultaneously. The 1909 sightings marked the first time it could be photographed. And now? Now it can manipulate digital technology itself. This thing isn't just surviving, it's evolving. Every encounter, every witness, every piece of evidence we collect, we're not documenting it, we're teaching it. Every attempt to study it gives it new ways to study us. Every new technology we develop gives it new ways to reach us. The frequencies of sightings tell an even more terrifying story. I've analyzed reports from every available source: police records, historical documents, classified government files. The pattern is exponential. What used to happen once every few decades now happens monthly. What used to require physical proximity can now spread through digital networks. Think about it. What happened to Mark's footage? It didn't just record darkness, it created it. Every device that plays it, every computer that analyzes it, every screen that displays it, starts recording that same darkness. The entity isn't just in the Pine Barrens anymore. It's in our networks, our devices, our digital world. The most chilling revelation came when I synchronized all known recordings of the darkness. Those 42 seconds of nothing, they're not empty. When played simultaneously, they form a pattern, a complex, evolving algorithm that our most advanced computers can barely begin to process. It's not just watching us, it's programming itself into our world, and it's accelerating. In the past week alone, I've received hundreds of reports from people who've never been near the Pine Barrens, never seen the footage, never even heard of Mark Sullivan, all describing the same thing. Their devices recording darkness at 3:17 a.m., all for exactly 42 seconds, all showing that same impossible pattern. We thought we were dealing with a creature, a cryptid, something that could be studied and understood. But we were wrong. This thing, this entity, this presence, it's not just evolving, it's awakening. Every piece of evidence we collect, every sighting we document, every attempt to understand it only serves to speed up its emergence. And now I understand why the Lenape warnings were so specific, why their translations were so carefully hidden. They weren't just trying to warn us about a monster. They were trying to warn us about what would happen when we got too close, looked too hard, learned too much. Because now it's not just watching anymore, it's ready. And we taught it how to reach us. What I'm about to show you is the clearest footage ever captured of the entity. Frame 2731, captured by Mark's primary camera. I've spent months analyzing every pixel, every shadow, every distortion. What you're about to see changes everything we thought we knew. First, focus on its structure. The entity appears to be roughly 9 feet tall, but that measurement shifts, not just between frames, but within them. In the same moment, it exists at multiple heights simultaneously. Its limbs extend beyond their own boundaries, leaving traces of themselves in positions they both occupied and never reached. The anatomy defies everything we know about biological structures. There's no skeletal system, no muscle mass, no recognizable organic material. Instead, its form seems to be composed of overlapping probability states, existing in multiple configurations at once, each one impossible, yet somehow all of them real. Look at the way it moves through frame 2732. It doesn't displace the air around it, it displaces reality itself. The space around it doesn't just bend, it reconfigures. Trees in its vicinity don't just move, they exist in multiple positions simultaneously. Light doesn't reflect off its surface, it gets absorbed into geometries that shouldn't be possible in three-dimensional space. But here's what everyone missed. It's not the entity we should have been studying, it's the camera. Every frame where the entity appears clearest is preceded by 42 frames of distortion. At first, we thought this was just electromagnetic interference, but I've discovered something far more terrifying. The distortions aren't random, they're adjustments. Each sequence of blurred frames shows the entity learning how to be seen by that specific camera. It's not just appearing on film, it's literally teaching itself how to exist in a form our technology can perceive. Now watch frame 2733 in extreme slow motion. Focus on the background, not the entity. See those dark spots in the tree line? Those aren't shadows, they're other cameras. Cameras Mark didn't place. The entity wasn't being captured on film. It was positioning Mark's cameras to create a perfect recording array of its own design. But the detail that truly terrifies me, the one that no one else noticed until now, look at Mark's reflection in the camera lens at the moment the entity appears. His expression isn't fear, it's recognition. Frame by frame, you can see the exact moment he realizes what he's actually seeing, because the entity in front of him, it's not looking at him, it's looking at us, right now, through this footage, through every screen that's ever played it, through every device that's ever recorded that 42 seconds of darkness. The standing hairs on Mark's neck, the sudden tension in his posture, he's not reacting to what's in front of him, he's reacting to something behind him. Something we can just barely see in the reflection of his pupils. Something that's standing in the exact same position relative to him as you are to your screen right now. This isn't found footage. This isn't a documentary. This is a template, a pattern, a lesson it created to teach itself how to reach through our technology. Every time this footage plays, every time someone watches these frames, every time a device records that darkness, it gets better at crossing over. And now I understand why all the reactions, all the readings, all the recordings happen at exactly 3:17 a.m. It's not just a timestamp, it's a door. One that exists in time rather than space. One that we've been helping it open, piece by piece, viewer by viewer, screen by screen. Mark wasn't its victim, he was its student, its prototype, its proof of concept. And now after all these viewings, all these analyses, all these attempts to understand what we're seeing, now it's ready to show us what it truly is. Check your device's timestamp. Check it right now. It's 3:16 a.m., isn't it? In the 3 months since I first shared this footage, 47 people have gone missing in New Jersey. Not just in the Pine Barrens anymore, in suburbs, cities, shopping malls. Each disappearance preceded by exactly 42 seconds of darkness on every digital device within 100 yards. Each at exactly 3:17 a.m. The government has quietly declared the Pine Barrens a restricted area, citing environmental concerns. Local residents are being offered generous relocation packages. Research stations are being dismantled. Cell towers are coming down. They're not trying to contain it anymore. They're trying to limit its pathways into our world. But it's too late. Last week, I received an email from someone claiming to be Mark Sullivan. The timestamp? 3:17 a.m. The contents? A single image that appears completely black until viewed at exactly 42% brightness. What it shows, what it reveals about where he is now, I'll never sleep soundly again. So let me be clear. If you're watching this, you're already involved. If you've seen the footage, heard the audio, even read about these events, it knows. It's learning from you right now, using your own perceptions, your own understanding, your own technology to bridge the gap between its reality and ours. Don't go to the Pine Barrens. Don't try to find Mark's cameras. Don't attempt to verify anything I've shown you. The entity doesn't just hunt those who seek it out, it hunts those who know it exists. Every person who's watched this footage, every researcher who's analyzed it, every skeptic who's tried to debunk it, their devices all show the same 42 seconds of darkness, all at the same time. All showing something learning to reach through. For those of you who think this is just another scary story, just another internet mystery, check your phones, check your laptops, check every screen you own. If they've started recording darkness even for a split second, it's already too late. It's noticed you, and it never ever loses interest in what it notices. I don't know if this warning will help anyone. I don't know if sharing this footage has doomed us all, but I do know this. Something ancient has awakened in New Jersey. Something that's been waiting, watching, learning. Something that's finally ready to show us why our ancestors drew those warnings, why they created those symbols, why they tried so desperately to make us understand. There's an old saying in the Pine Barrens, the devil doesn't hunt at night, it hunts at the edges of night. Now I understand what that means. It's not about darkness. It's about the moment between what we think is real and what truly exists. The moment when our certainty fails and something else slips through. So the next time your screen goes dark, the next time your device records that impossible void, the next time you feel something watching you through your own technology, remember this. There's a reason they say the devil still hunts in Jersey. Because it's not hunting for bodies, it's hunting for witnesses. And you just became one.